Hello and welcome to the very first FIPWiSE and Fearless podcast. I'm Claire Thompson. I have the privilege of chairing the FIPWiSE movement. We strive to engage, enable and empower girls and women to achieve their full potential in pharmaceutical science and education. Our very first guest on the FIPWiSE and Fearless podcast is Vibhuti Arya. So Vibhuti is a pharmacist, educator, activist, TED speaker. I could go on, but I think we've probably only got a limited time here. Vibhuti, welcome.
Thank you so much, Claire, for having me. This is quite exciting.
It's fabulous, isn't it? Vibhuti, can you tell us a bit about what you do now and how did you get here?
So it's a long, windy road, I will say. I am a first-generation immigrant in the US, and as I started my journey, I had, I would say, more roots of sort of community organizing, community engagement, social justice, and found theater to be my outlet, and using humor likely as a survival mechanism to just keep life light. And I think that as I started observing a lot of things that impact what we now know to be social determinants of health, it was a very clear way for me to understand that healthcare, public health, these are sort of intertwined and they're not siloed. And so my weaving in of social justice principles and frameworks into my work has always been there since I was a student, actually. And so I've kept my activism, close to my heart, but also have infused it within my teaching and my work that I do not only as a professor, but also public health practice with the New York City Health Department. And yeah, so I've just sort of picked up lots of different facilitation techniques and have been trained over the years to facilitate conversations on racial justice and what that means in terms of creating incremental change to essentially ensure progress for the larger movement, so to speak.
And what particular challenges have you faced through your career and how have you hit them head on?
How much time do we have on this? I see it as sort of a journey where I think the challenges are sort of baked in and they're just going to continue because there's issues with, of course, the individual self in terms of my own self-preservation and presenting this work and processing a lot of my own emotions and state of being around what I see as injustice around me that impacts people. I like to remind my students and colleagues that, these are not just data, they're not numbers, they're actually people, they're narratives, they're stories, they're moms and dads and family members and relatives and children who are impacted many times very severely because of injustice. And so the challenges have sort of been ongoing. I think the greatest challenges likely have been in how to help or how to serve this movement in moving from a very binary sort of thinking to holding complexity and making people comfortable with that. So it's essentially introducing comfort for the discomfort. And that's where the rich dialogues happen. That's where the growth and learning happens. And that's where I see the most impact, I think, being made when people are okay letting go of the binary, this or that, good versus evil, have not, winner loser mentality, and moving into holding complexity and then acting from there.
And a lot of this, I mean, you talked about external challenges, but also internal challenges as well. A lot of this comes down to really determining your values and also your value. So how do you value what you are bringing to a task, what you're bringing to an organization, and also the value that you feel in return? Can you reflect on how you help, how you yourself and how you help others to determine their values and their value?
Yeah, I think for me, it's a lot about asking questions. So rather than jumping to solutions or conclusions, I often find myself asking a lot more questions, not only of myself, but also of others, right? What you may perceive a problem to me is not necessarily what I perceive the problem to be. And so we may be using the same words, but those words may have very different meanings for folks. And so for me, it's about holding authenticity dear to my heart. And really, that just means honesty, right? Bringing honesty to where I am, but also when I am honest, I also, I think, am embracing and modeling some vulnerability for others to ensure that this is not, again, about who's right or wrong, but about making connections. And I think for me, part of, you know, where I sort of at the end of the day close my eyes and feel okay with is that I know that I've spoken up when I've seen things that I need to speak up about. I have practiced self-compassion as well, in understanding that there are times where I'm ready to fight and there are times where I need to just sit down and self-preserve, and that's okay as well. For me, the biggest value is in building coalitions and building communities. I don't subscribe to this sort of individual self-reliance only aspect. I think that there is merit to it, but I also think that there is a huge merit to communal thinking and sort of raising communities, if you will. I don't, if we don't have a collective, I don't think ideas are going to not only just survive, but also thrive in their fullest capacity. So for me, those values are a lot about being real with yourself and knowing when you have the compassion to hold space and when you need space. And also keeping very, very close to this idea about the collective. That's very, very important to me. And, you know, as a sort of newish mom, I guess, or as a mom now, that parenthood has also introduced a lot of complexity with that, because at the end of the day, I want to go to sleep and I want to know that I did the right things. I did. And what I mean by that is that I stayed true to myself, that I spoke up when I needed to, and I modeled that behavior. I'm less focused on doing parenting and more focused on being a parent and who I am. That's part of my identity, but modeling that is really important. And so the collective sort of builds from there. And this might sound morbid, but I remember thinking that, well, you know, if I die prematurely, I think that I have created enough of a network, particularly among young people, who can impart maybe bits and pieces of things that our interactions have meant to them, and give that to my girls. And I'm confident that they will have a pretty good sense of who I am and what I stand for. And there's some sort of comfort and peace in that for me.
So you're instilling the value in your girls from a young age. That's fantastic.
I suppose so.
I mean, I've got a 4-year-old daughter. I don't know how you handle two. One is, she outruns me already. And I promised her when she was tiny that I would do everything within my power to ensure that she wasn't defined by her looks or confined by her gender. Yeah, she's a feisty one. She's fiercely independent already. In fact, I think she's probably going to join us on the podcast this evening.
And I think isn't that the beauty, right? Because I think that there's so much intentionality around being a parent, or again, using it more as a verb than a state of being. But there is some sort of self-compassion and grace there that we can give ourselves in knowing that modeling and being with them and being present with them is going to rub off at some point, right? It's gonna impart something onto them. And I think at the end of the day, we do the best we can. But it is important, I think, to establish that sense of value in the kids, because it's part of who we are, you know. And it seems simple, but could be quite challenging if you're very intentional about it, but also could be very simple if, you know, you're just sort of taking a seat and being who you are. And I think that they observe that and understand what that model to be like.
Let's focus on the here and the now and the hideous that is the pandemic. I hope the end is in sight, but certainly it's been a long year. It's been a long 12 months. What particular challenges have you faced through the pandemic, and what have you learned about yourself?
Whew, there's enough probably for many podcasts in there. I took the time actually to be with my family, and I took time off from work, but I've still engaged professionally and have been probably what others might perceive to be pretty productive during that time professionally. But I think the biggest growth has been for me personally. The biggest challenge I would say I have faced is keeping the time to create that intentional time and space for processing for myself. Particularly the work that I do has everything to do with social justice, and particularly in this past year, I think with the unique sort of convergence of the pandemic happening, the presence of social media, and everybody being connected somehow, and also the social sort of uprisings, if you will, or bringing social justice to the main stage of the conversation. I think that a lot of it has been being there as a parent, but also taking time for myself. And a lot of times that has been very challenging, because I find myself that I need some time to process what's going on. I need time to recover from holding space in my work for these conversations, and then just being present as well. So I think that there's been a lot of introspection and going inward, of just finding what I call little moments for myself to just breathe and be, and not be driven by some sort of metric or productivity measure, but more about just being in the present. And kids do have a unique way of, they're very present, they're very Buddha-esque, if you will. And so they do have a great way of reminding us to be in the present. So I think that's been my biggest challenge in balancing, or I don't even know if balancing is the right word, or just existing with those two things in a very intense way.
Yeah, kids are really grounding, aren't they?
Mm-hmm.
And I've been really trying to let myself rest, or make myself rest, because I've certainly gone up and down that stress curve pretty rapidly and frequently over the last 10 months, 12 months. So kids are great at that. They can just snap you right out of it. But working and parenting and trying to give yourself some headspace.
Yeah. It's
pretty tricky.
Yeah. And some days are great with it, and some days, many days, maybe most days, are just not that great with it. But I think that that's part of the personal journey, though. I think as you asked, what have I learned about myself? I think that, again, I don't know if there's one single factor to point to, but as a culture, perhaps we're so hard on ourselves. And I don't know when parenthood became such a thing of criticism and judgment, and consequently there just seems to be such a pressure cooker type of feel to it, where I think I reflect on my parents, and they didn't have any of these things, and we turned out okay, I think. And we appreciate our relationships with our parents. And I think so the biggest personal journey has just kind of been, again, more on less focus on doing and more focus on being. And that resonates as transformational for me.
So let's talk about your career. Who has helped you the most during your career?
Oh, it's taken a global village to raise me. I'm
a big believer that success is not a solo sport.
Definitely not. And you and I have talked about this, where, rather than looking at it as sort of this mentality of there's one star player or an individual or a lone genius, or that sort of mentality, it's more about more akin to maybe soccer, right? Like there is a team sport mentality to it. That's my favorite sport. I know that's yours, but there is that sort of mentality of the group and the collective. And there have been countless mentors, friends. And I don't mean mentors in the what some may perceive to be the traditional sense of somebody who's sort of in a higher position, so to speak, or older. I have a lot of young mentors. I have former students who've turned into mentors. I have mentees who are my mentors. I don't see it as sort of that hierarchical relationship, but I definitely have what I call my communities, and I belong to several of them. And I think that's also not only just a way to ground me, but also just a really tremendous reflection of just the collective hard work it's taken. I stand on the shoulders of giants. I really do. And I think that's probably also why it's so strong in me to ensure that we're also contributing what we can to raise communities and get out of their way, frankly.
Yeah, it's a tribe. I'm similar. So I surround myself with fabulous people. I call them my ace people. Not great with my accent, but they're authentic, credible, and engaging. And those are the tribe that I will go to if I'm in a quandary or difficulty, or I think I have a wonderful idea and I need to run it past some sensible people. And they're always there.
Yeah,
it's phenomenal.
I think Yeah, exactly. And I think that one of the other things that I'm also very keen about is to ensure that there is diversity in every aspect in terms of people who may not necessarily think like me. And then there's also sort of a little bit of a removed community-ish who don't know me maybe as intricately, but know, at least have a sense of what I'm about. But we have honest communication where if I do feel I need a little bit more of an outsider perspective in, what the situation may call for, I think it's also important to have that, because the community is not just there to support in a yes, go ahead type of way, but more about challenging us to grow and look at things from different perspectives. And so I think that I love having the community to celebrate with, and I love having the community to also keep me grounded in ways that are, of course, more spiritual in nature, but also just very practically to offer different perspectives where I want to learn how I could do things differently, or what I may have done differently should I find myself in the same situation again.
So Vibhuti, it's International Women's Day. Woohoo! So I'm a believer that the best leaders, they have the spotlight shone upon them, and the best ones actually shine that light on others. Is there anyone that you would like to shine your light on?
I have another collective where it's a whole community of really amazing. They tend to call me their mentor, but I tend to look at it maybe not subscribe to the sort of authoritarian or power aspect, but I have an amazing community of a lot of young practitioners, many of whom are in pharmacy in our discipline, but many of them are also not. And so I have I would say maybe a community of folks that I definitely try to do my best in amplifying wherever and whenever I can. And to be clear, because it was modeled for me that way, I came from that construct. And I think that's why, because it was shown to me how wonderful it is that it can be done, and people have done that for me, I pay it forward, because there's a ton of talent coming up. And I think that what I love about sort of this, if I can say, next generation, is just their ways in which they communicate and advocate, but also deconstruct these social constructs and just ideas and ways in which they challenge us. And I think that that's who I usually shine my light on, is to ensure that they are shown more, if that's the word, or amplified in ways that maybe they're not necessarily seeking necessarily, right? But it is an opportunity to sort of bring attention to their narratives and allow the obstacles to be removed, so that they're not having those same exact conversations and same exact fights, if that makes sense. It's more about paving the way and using our privilege and wherever our voice and advocacy can be to make room.
And part of that is giving them the confidence in their competence, isn't it? And to using a football, soccer analogy, we're creating space for them to move into. And I think we should all do more of that. Vibhuti, yeah. I heard you're writing a book.
I think I am. I'm not sure. I'm putting together some sort of collection of essays or some piece that I think I would like to. I don't know what it's going to turn into, but it was addressed to my daughters. So it's letters to my daughters. And I think that a lot of the theme that seems to be emerging is about the complexity of what a beautiful mess we all are, and to not only understand, but embrace it, that things are complex and there is beauty in there. So yeah, they're just sort of tidbits of lessons that I have learned. Again, not to sound morbid, but nice to leave something with them that they can sort of reflect on. So that's sort of where my head was at that time. And I just started to write things down and thought, well, maybe this may turn into something. I'm not sure.
Glorious. So what advice would you give to your 25-year-old self?
Hang in there. Hang in there, it gets better. I think that a lot of times, I think in activism particularly, and being part of a larger movement, there's a lot of feelings around, is this worth anything? Is this gonna, gosh, there's so many battles uphill, and whew, should I abandon this? Can I do this?
So what were
And
you
although
doing
at the,
what were you doing at
yeah,
age 25?
I don't remember. I think I was early in my faculty career, maybe. I had just taken some time off, I think, between my residency and my job. I'm a big fan of taking time off, as you can see. That pattern is there in my life. And
like you're not doing anything there.
Right. True. I think what I mean, very good point. But I tend to be less driven from, again, productivity measures and more towards just feeding my spirit wherever that takes me. It ends up probably being productive, but I think I look at it as, there are no constraints. Just do what feeds your spirit right now, and sort of let it guide me. And I think that there's just been a lot of journey around, like I said, I've been doing this work since I was, I want to say 17, 18 years old. And, in my profession, it's always been a social justice lens and a public health lens. And I think that although pharmacy as a profession is certainly having more of this conversation right now, it's not been the norm. It's not been at the main stage. And so I think that there was, and has been, and sometimes still is, a sentiment of just the effort, what seems to be simple turns into a Herculean effort. And I think that it just sometimes can really bog you down. And I think that I would just tell my younger self to hang in there and continue to be unapologetically who I am, and just that it gets better. I've always stuck to it, but there definitely have been times where I've softened sort of the intensity of who I am to introduce the narrative in certain spaces. And I just no longer, over time you develop that sort of muscle, if you will, of knowing how to do that, but still carry the intensity. And so I think that's why I'm very intent on paving the way for more young folks to come into their own lens and step into their own narratives. It's been tough, I won't lie, it's been challenging. But I'm so happy and proud at the end of the day that I've stuck to it, and I continue to do so. That was a really long-winded piece of advice.
Keep going and
hang in there. Hang in there. Yeah.
Keep going. So this leads us on to the next question about being brave. So the name of this podcast is FIPWiSE and Fearless, and that was on purpose. So I heard a fantastic speaker a few years ago called Tassie Opotu. So she's a pharmacist based in the hospital in London. And she said that whenever I send my kids out to school in the morning, I don't tell them to be good anymore. I tell them to be fearless. And ever since then, that's what I say to my daughter when she goes off to preschool in the morning. Have fun and be fearless. And actually, she would like to ask you the next question.
What a treat.
Hi, V. When have you been fearless?
That is a great question, Maya. Thank you for asking that. Can I just say my entire life? I'm kidding. There's a great children's character called Pete the Cat. And so when I usually discuss sort of bravery and valor with my 6 and 3-year-old, we talk about how it's important to be, in order to be brave, it's important to first be scared. And so it is important to understand the emotion around and the anxiety around sort of having fear, being scared. And then you make that step into understanding how you can get past that. So most recently, I think that there have been some clients I've had and conversations that I've been part of around racial justice where the intention has been good, but the impact and how comments landed on folks were not so good and harmful, actually. And I think that there is always a sense of, when you're doing this work, to say, do I just kind of let it go, or do I basically step into my role as facilitator that I was hired to do and bring this up, even though I can anticipate and imagine, I can see it already, it's going to ruffle some feathers. And I think that most recently I've had those experiences, and I've just sort of gone ahead and said, hey, diplomatically, but probably some language is still too progressive, maybe for some people who may not be ready for that. And sometimes people say they're ready for things when they're actually not. And so in those conversations, and it actually can be quite traumatic, I will admit, because sometimes you get thrown under the bus or you get blamed for creating an uncomfortable space by people who, for example, white men or white women who don't recognize that by saying things that they did, they actually created uncomfortable space for folks of color in their organization and in their community and in their unit. And so I think that it's, man, it was a tough one to go through, but I think that I was happy. I don't apologize for my message, and I stand by, what I stand for. And frankly, that the vulnerability, and I always ask this question, when you become vulnerable or when a vulnerability is revealed, what's your reaction to it? If the reaction is to get defensive and run away, well, that's one thing. But if we can just sort of share a moment, if you're willing to take a deep breath and have a moment where you can admit that, wow, that feels just a lot and it's okay for us to talk about it, then I think there's progress. So I think that my work mostly requires me to have at least some sort of pep talk to myself and be fearless in engaging in this conversation. But I also want to make clear that there's a very significant step in that conversation, which is to embrace the fear and the anxiety, like I said, with the Pete the Cat character that comes with it. So, I think a lot of time people perceive fearless to sort of be a, well, they'll just say and do anything and it doesn't matter. It's like, no, we actually, in order to be fearless and brave, you kind of have to embrace the other side of it as well. And again, you can hold that complexity together. It means to take that step and say, I'm going to commit to this. I understand what may come and how people may react may not be the most suitable to me right now, or, it's more indicative likely of where they're at, but that it's okay, because when I went to sleep, I know that if, again, my daughters understand the story and what I did, I know I can say that I practiced what I preached.
I also want to add that when I speak about when I have been fearless, those moments, it is inseparable from the who that has helped get me there and continues to sustain me there. Because I think a lot of times when we talk about bravery and being fearless, it is oftentimes hard and challenging and uncomfortable. And when you have a solid foundation of a community that has your support and has your backing, so to speak, it's really that much more impactful. And so I don't separate the who from the moments that I have been fearless. And for that, I really want to acknowledge my family for laying that foundation very early on to be unapologetically who I am and to continue to be brave and courageous.
Do you see yourself as a leader?
In the sense that I shake things up, sure, maybe. Sure, but I think that I tend to stick to more about a person who challenges perspectives. I like to hold complexity in having conversations that don't just say one truth exists. I like to challenge and offer that truth can exist, but there are also these other truths that can coexist. And so, sure, maybe the things that I do, people may perceive to be leading change. Yeah, that's fine, but it's cool. I don't get hung up on the on the title of it all, but yeah, I do. I lead conversations, and I invite people to think differently, and I invite people to challenge the status quo.
And how are you using your power and your platform and your privilege to make things better for other women in science and education? Because we all have a responsibility to do that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think what we've talked about in terms of amplifying the voices and really shining the light on others, I think is extremely important. I think that there is an aspect of humility that has to be embraced, not in a self-righteous way. So I want to be very clear about that, that especially in the work that I do and in being an activist, it's easy and more seductive perhaps to get caught up with the self-righteous attitude And I'm less interested in that and more interested in being impactful. So it's not about being right or wrong or, sort of really, advanced or whatever. In this, people say woke a lot, and it's not about that. It's about actually understanding how to make incremental changes, create the connections and networks to then influence a bigger change that hopefully should outlive us all. But, like I've said before, I would love to, in my lifetime, as I'm, breathing and have the mental faculties in charge, that somebody just comes around and makes my work look cute. I would love that to happen. And I hope that happens during our lifetime.
Absolutely agree. Vibhuti, it's been just fabulous to speak to you this evening. Will you come back when you've published your book?
I would be happy to. I don't know when that will be, but I would be happy to. And I hope that, I want to congratulate, FIPWiSE, but also just the community that we have, right? In these international, what I call a powerhouse of amazing women. And again, it's creating a collective, it's creating a community where people can feel supported. And I just want to emphasize as we sort of leave that it's so important for us to question things, but also reflect on them, on ourselves, in terms of how we feel about what's happening around us. There is a social obligation and responsibility that all of us have. I think that we all have power, we all have agency, we all have some amount of privilege or power in whatever sense of the word that means to you. And within our own spheres of influence, we need to understand how to use that power. I think it's really important, actually. I think it's imperative and vital if we are going to see progress and change. And I'm sure this is cyclical. I'm sure other generations will, quality assurance us and say, oh, these things were good, but you guys did this wrong. And that's okay. And that's welcomed. And that critique is important to continue to progress. So I just want to leave with that realization that all of us have work to do individually and as a system. But we have to remember that we are part of the system. We perform and behave in the system, that our adaptations and performances and behaviors contribute to the culture. And so none of us get to be, none of us are off the hook, so to speak. All of us have to be very, very intentional about the work that we do. And some days you will be all game for it. And some days you'll want to just crawl into a hole and do your own meditation, and that's okay too. But having that power of the collective allows us to be supported when we need it and to celebrate when we need it. And I think there's just so much beauty in understanding that.
Vibhuti, thank you for talking to us today, and thank you for being fearless.
Thank you so much for having me.